Right, this week heavily dominated by one major topic, which we shall spend the first part of the programme discussing. It's not going to be a 10 by 6 this week, is it, mate? It's going to be a 4 by 10. 4 by 10? Yeah, that's cool.
4 by 10 plus.
4
Yeah,
by
we're
10
going to
plus.
cut it down to 4 issues because we got a couple of slightly longer interviews and we wanted to devote enough time to have this discussion. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, let's get straight into the first topic. The England football team came very, 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 very close to being triumphant on the football pitch. It certainly it's been triumphant off the football pitch throughout the whole of the tournament and its stance. But just to concentrate on the football, I thought we were good in the first half, fairly mediocre in the second half, extremely mediocre in extra time. I think we probably could have won it if we'd gone on the front foot a lot more in the second half, maybe introduced more flair players earlier without such a rigid formation, perhaps even releasing one of the central midfield players and putting on someone like Sancho or Rashford or whoever, just to mix it up a bit and do something different. And I think, like I said, to people around me when I was watching the game, I did feel a little bit like that Chiellini and Harry Kane, when they flipped the coin at the beginning of the game, they could have just said, right, we'll just go straight to penalties, shall we? Because after the excitement of obviously Luke Shaw's goal after a couple of minutes, it was right old downhill from there, wasn't it, really? In terms of the way in which they played, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, overall, Italy, best team in the tournament, not just sort of objectively, but in terms of all the statistics, shots on goal, possession, completed passes, successful tackles, etc. They were way the best team in the tournament, deserved the victory. England did extremely well in the whole tournament. Great credit to the whole squad and the manager and his team. And as you say, off the pitch as well as on, they've what they've done this summer has been important, and even more so now that the final is over and we have the repercussions from that, which we're going to go on to speak about. I think great credit to Southgate and his team and the team of England players who are now speaking up for a better, more decent society, which is great to see.
Yeah, we had a crowded room. My son's friends were here, and as soon as the Italian team started running around the pitch celebrating, I turned to them and I just said, "You know what's going to happen now, don't you? 3 black players have just missed penalties, so we're going to have all the right-wing bleep who are now going to be blaming them and taking advantage of the situation." And it was, I said it because I genuinely believed it was going to happen, but I said it because it was just an instinctive feeling, unfortunately, because of the way in which this government and many people on social media, minority has to be said, it's a minority, but it's a significant minority that makes a lot of noise, who almost entirely lack compassion, empathy, that understanding, and they lack authenticity because they're not honest, especially the politicians. They'll say these things and then automatically when pressured, they'll deny it. I mean, again, this morning, Boris Johnson in Coventry, standing up, speaking to the public, is asked a direct question, basically given the evidence about the things that he said, and he denied it. It's a real experience now. It's a Trumpian nature of politics. It's an extremely weird experience to know you've heard something, to have thought about it, to analyze it, to have read thousands, if not sometimes tens of thousands of words about the subject, and then for a politician to be appealing to a demographic who don't have the capacity to remember, or if they do have the capacity to remember, it's because they're so blindly in line with that particular politician or that ideology. And obviously, post Brexit, we discussed this a number of times, you don't need to go over it. But they're so blindly accepting it that even when the person who they know said this, they'll still stand up and say, no, they didn't, or he didn't mean that, or it was set out of context, or you're just wokes taking advantage of a situation that it doesn't exist. And it's just, it's like almost like we're all in a level of psychosis. That's how I feel. It's like society now is not responding to reality. It's responding to a person's version of, or a group of people's version of reality. Then it's then backed up, as we talked about in the past, by trolls and by people who simply seem to have a very, very dangerous and sick agenda.
Yeah. And, you know, for the benefit of the viewers, it would have been easy for Jason and I to, you know, just come on here and condemn the so-called supporters. They're obviously not true England supporters, but the racists, the people that have posted racist abuse towards England players, which is appalling, clearly appalling. And we should castigate them, condemn them, their actions. We should insist that they're identified and penalised. But what we wanted to do instead was to discuss what creates that environment where people think it's okay to do that, where people hold those racist beliefs and choose to act on them, and support, you know, racist politicians, you know, and even far right groups, etc. What creates that environment? And undoubtedly, what we've seen is a use of racism, a utilization of racism by politicians and the media to promote their agenda, to gain power, to stay in power, and to gain support and to promote their right-wing agenda. And we've seen it in America, as you say, it's very Trumpian. You know, the biggest statement that Trump made before he was elected in 2016 was about building the wall. As soon as he was elected, the biggest policy he implemented was the Muslim ban. You know, these are not dog whistles; these are foghorns, bullhorns for racists and white supremacists. And of course, it's also to create scapegoats and lay blame for people's economic and other difficulties, as we've discussed on the show before. You know, what's happening is that right-wing politicians are essentially stealing all the money for their mates, for their rich mates, through tax cuts, through allowing, you know, offshore tax havens, through clamping down on workers' rights and wages, you know, having wage freezes, keeping minimum wages low. Minimum wage in America is like $7 something, it's like £5, £6 an hour. You know, tens of millions of people on poverty wages, and you know, what they want, of course, as we've discussed before, is to create the optimum conditions for capitalist accumulation, for the rich to get richer, for the corporations in particular. We're not really talking about mom and pop stores here, you know, old-fashioned, quaint idea of capitalism that everyone can get on by running their own little business. Those businesses have mostly been bought up or destroyed, put out of business by the big corporations, who get richer and richer and richer and don't contribute to society. They just exploit people, they just exploit the planet. And you know, we're in that stage of late stage capitalism where we can see the destruction that capitalism is causing to people's lives and to the planet. And right-wing politicians who are paid by these corporations, in the pay of these corporations, including fossil fuel industries, are just promoting policies or implementing policies, you know, that creates those optimum conditions for the rich to get richer. And it's been described as, both in America and in Britain, it's been, you know, the last 10, 15 years has been described as a period of time that's been seen the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of humankind. That's what's happened. That's what true economists honest economists are saying this period represents a massive transfer of wealth from poor people, from ordinary people, from society, from the public purse to the mega rich. And of course, that includes the destruction of public services that enhance people's lives and support them, especially if they're vulnerable and in need. So it's just appalling. And as we've said before, as I've said numerous times, eventually people don't vote for that anymore. They think that's really bad for me, bad for my family, bad for my community, bad for my friends and neighbours. It's really bad for anything. It's only good for the 1% richest people in the country. So I'm not voting for that anymore. The only way that these people can get a significant number of the population to vote for them is by creating scapegoats to blame. And they do that mostly by racism. They do it in other ways. For years, we've had, right-wing politicians in the media rail against, people on benefit scroungers, benefit cheats, even at times, people with disabilities and others. But they rail against. It used to be loony left councils, and now it's the war against woke and culture wars and things. So there's ways that they try and divide and rule and get support through waging war on different things. But the biggest thing they do is blame immigrants and foreigners. In America, and the right do it in America. Trump did it like no one's ever done that before, and divided America. America is now a divided country that's anti-democratic in so many ways, and is has a significant amount of hate. It's a divided country that's filled with a lot of people who are now very hateful. And Trump and Fox News created that. And we're seeing that here in this country. Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, and other right-wing politicians, including Farage, have used racism. They've utilized it quite deliberately to get what they want, to get Brexit, to get policies where, to get elected so they can implement policies where they give vast sums of money to their rich mates. And the only way that people are still voting for them is because they've taught us all, taught a large percentage of the population to blame foreigners, immigrants, black people, etc., to create this resentment. And it's sickening. It's sickening.
I think it has to be a lot more than that, though, Tom. I mean, firstly, unless you're allowed to offer an absolute alternative to that type of dog whistle, victim blaming politics, then there is no alternative for them, is there? So they succumb to the corporate billionaire media. They read the Sun, they read the Express, they read the Mail, they read the Star, they read the Telegraph. I think IQ is slightly higher, educational background is slightly different, but ultimately they have that dog whistle day in, day out being pumped into their consciousness. So at the moment, all we're seeing is these politicians taking advantage of that. And it's interesting listening to some of the MPs, or looking at some of the MPs on social media, for example, who are in the Conservative Party, and they're basically arguing, which is like the first time I've really seen this certainly for a long time, is that the Tory politicians don't know what they're doing. They're creating the culture wars because they haven't got a clue. They didn't have a clue how to cope with austerity, apart from falling into the same old dogma. They didn't have a clue about COVID because they've spent so much time in denial. And then they're having to react really, really quickly and pull things from all around, pull rabbits out of hats, which they didn't manage to do that either. They then managed to get some official scientists to stand next to them on podiums day after day after day to give them some sort of legitimation, even though a lot of people were also reporting that behind the scenes, these scientists were often extremely uncomfortable with the decisions that were being made by the Conservative politicians. But because they stood on the podium, they had no voice to contradict. They were basically told they couldn't do it. You then got a voting system that only allows the winner, which means if you have a winner with, let's say, 30%, or in this instance, the Tory party with 42, 43%, they only represent the minority. So we have a voting system that constantly and certainly since the Second World War, every single government has been a minority government. They have all been just representative of a minority of the population. So that's not healthy, because so many people who cast their votes then just feel alienated for 4 or 5 years and not represented. So we got constant bombardment of fake news and false messages and denials of things that we know have been said. It gets to a point now where it's not democracy anymore. It's a very unhealthy situation that we've seen for millennia. I mean, the Roman Empire was no real difference. They found ways of on the one hand giving to the population, on the other hand taking away, and creating this perception, that they were the best people, they were chosen by the gods to rule and govern. So what we have now in terms of this white supremacy, they had their own supremacy back then, and a belief that they were superior to everyone else. Their empire collapsed, and every single government along the way, eventually, as you say, people get disturbed by the fact that they have these politicians, but we have nowhere to go. With Corbyn, we had an opportunity for change, but of course they saw that the threshold of election victory was so narrow that they had to get rid of Corbyn in case he won. So they lied, and they lied again in order for just enough people to get them over the line. We say an 80-seat majority, but it's actually only 2 to 3 million votes, which isn't very many when you think that there's 70 million people in this country and there's between 40 and 50 million people who are eligible to vote. So 3 million isn't really that great, but it still means that they have a minority of the people on side, thanks to the billionaire corporate media, thanks to the pumping out of lies, thanks to finding a scapegoat, i.e. the EU, to blame for everything. And it comes to me as well, the reason I started this point is nothing has got any better. We managed, we had a Tory government from 2010 who said that they would sort the economy out by 2015. It was twice the debt in 2015 than it was in 2010. So they didn't cure the problem, they actually made it twice as bad. Brexit, the EU. What happens in 5 years' time when exactly the same things exist in people's lives, experiences that were there when the EU is in place? How are they going to explain it then? How are they going to excuse it? So this dog whistle politics that we have now, we had over the other side of the Atlantic, this division by using this process of negative labels, it only goes so far as long as the people who believe it are ignorant, who take very little interest in politics, who have very low levels of critical thinking skills, and generally their empathy levels are very low because they don't have that compassion and desire to work towards a better society for us all. So you have to create that, don't you, Tom? Sorry, I'll come in now, but you have to create that bubble. And so it's manufactured externally all the time by these institutions, from Westminster to Fleet Street to wherever, constantly molding this bubble so there's just enough people in it to keep these undescribables in power.
Yeah.
And it's not like people don't care. I mean, sorry, Tom, if please crack in now, but it's not like people don't care. As we've seen this week in terms of the responses, I mean, Dorset Eye has been flooded with contributions that go right to the core. They really go to the core. The problem is that who reads them? Because you end up in this echo chamber where people say, oh, Dorset Eye, it's left wing, don't touch it. But the problem is they stay ignorant. They keep voting for the monster, and the monster does absolutely nothing for them. But in their minds, in their imaginations, they genuinely believe that this monster is better than another monster. But the only reason they don't like the other monster is because it's a manufactured perception. not a reality that they've ever experienced.
Yeah. What was some of, you've got some articles there, Jace, to share in case people hadn't heard of some of the criticism of Johnson and Patel, because obviously Johnson and Patel, after the appalling racist abuse on social media came out, they condemned it, but of course they stoked it. So there's several examples, in case people weren't aware, there's several examples here. So yeah, one of the best was obviously Tyrone Mings, who, if you just scroll up a tiny bit, Jace, Tyrone Mings there said, directly in response to Priti Patel, he tweeted to her after she'd criticised online racism. He said, "You don't get to stoke the fire at the beginning of the tournament by labelling our anti-racism message as gesture politics and then pretend to be disgusted when the very thing we're campaigning against happens." I mean, a great response from him, and that's exactly right. Exactly what gets to the truth of the matter. You know, both Boris Johnson and Priti Patel refused to condemn the booing of our players taking a knee to stand up for racial justice. How disgusting that they refused to condemn that bullying from the far right. And it was, the far right were very involved in organising that and campaigning against the taking of the knee. They refused to condemn that. I mean, it goes back to a similar thing like Trump in America, who very clearly on a regular basis gave a nod and a wink to the white supremacists, to the Nazis, and that almost culminated, if you like, in Charlottesville, the appalling scenes and murder that took place at Charlottesville, where literally Nazis were shouting, "Jews will not replace us," with tiki torches. And Trump described these neo-Nazis as very fine people. He said they were very fine people on both sides. It leads to politicians literally, supporting Nazism. It's so despicable. And I mean, ultimately, that culminated in the attempt to overthrow a democratic election and stage a coup, an insurrection, a violent insurrection. 5 people died as a result of that, including several.
If we allow Tom, these people to have a platform, if we allow Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, Donald Trump, etc., to have a platform, they're going to appeal to the people who put them there. So if we call it a democracy, and within a democracy anything goes, until, of course, that's the theory, but of course it isn't, because the establishment pick and choose who they want to be anything going. So they allowed Boris Johnson in, they allowed Donald Trump in. In some cases, people high up in the establishment manufactured them being in power. So it's logic to expect then, once they do, that the policies, the pronouncements, the sound bites are going to be to try to appeal to those people who put them there. So it's not just the individual's responsibility. It's not just the individual's fault. It's a systemic failure that allows, one, those attitudes to still exist even after people leave the education system. It's a systemic failure that we have a corporate media that plays to it purely for their balancing their profits and their resources. And it's a systemic failure that politicians then get to govern in our name off the back of those types of attitudes. So what we do is we get hung up from blaming these individual personalities, as I've mentioned, and as you've mentioned, but it's not going to change until we have a really radical systemic overhaul. And at the moment, we're so far away from it. We have an education system that's just about preparing people for the world of work and not teaching them really, really how to think, to engage in critical thinking, to engage in analysis, to engage in evaluation, to be able to come out as human beings actually realizing their potential. So many human beings are crushed because they only want them to be working in in retail, or they're working in, as shop assistants, or doing menial jobs across the whole public and private sector. And they have that one chance, that one stab of existence, and it's in a menial, low-skilled, low-income role. So that's the system that we have. That's the system that we currently find ourselves reproducing generation after generation. So we can shout at Boris Johnson, we can shout at Priti Patel, we can shout at Donald Trump and all those others as much as we like. But until we change the system, we're going to die, and other people are going to take our place and just continue shouting, because that's all we can effectively do.
And yes, you're right, Jason. And obviously, it's worth pointing out at this point that menial is a description. It's not meant in a derogatory way. And we've learned through the pandemic that the most important people in our society, the ones that keep society going, are people that are in low-paid jobs. That are often described as low-skilled jobs, but actually, those people that take away rubbish, that work in supermarkets, etc. These people are, and that do care work. These people are critical to the functioning of society.
Yes, but I need to come back in there, Tom. Sorry, but yeah, we've created a system in which we have people taking away our rubbish, and we have supermarkets. You can create a whole different type of society that's much, much, much more sustainable, that doesn't rely upon a small number of people taking our crap away once a week, or working in a massive corporate chain in which they get paid next to nothing by owners who are making millions, if not billions, off their backs, and are having houses and properties all around the planet. That needs to change. We need the way in which we eat food, the way in which we need to produce food locally. The whole notion of that side of our lifestyles needs to radically change. The way we get rid of waste needs to change radically. Not just, where does that waste go? We now know, for example, it's just taken on board ships, a lot of it, and dumped in other countries who are desperate, so they're being paid in order to take our crap. Yeah. So yes, those people have done an amazing job, but how aware of those people, how much they're being exploited and treated, and often how meaningless their roles actually are.
Yeah. So going back to you're right, Jason, and we have covered sort of green and ecological issues, from climate change to actual local initiatives that are good for the planet and environment and wildlife, and perhaps we should spend some time one week looking at how a society, or how communities in a very different society could work in a completely different way that's much better for people and much better for the planet. Going back to our topic, there was a quote there from oh sorry, you've just clicked off it, Jace, but there was a quote from could you click back on that? I just wanted, in case people didn't see, to mention Gary Neville.
I was going to come on to the Gary Neville one, actually. Yes. It corresponds.
Neville there said, so Neville there said the Prime Minister said it was okay for the population of this country to boo those players who are trying to promote equality and defend against racism. It starts at the very top. And he went on to say that we've had very poor leadership in this country for the last few years. It's a great credit to Neville for raising the level of debate above just criticising the disgusting racist actions of some people.
We can watch it now.
It starts at the top.
We can watch it now. Hopefully, it seems to have vanished. So if I can get it going as soon as it comes up.
Yeah. He's a very intelligent chap, actually, Neville. And
2-3 weeks ago, we had a manager I think everybody in this country trusts, a leader who everybody in this country trusts. We had players line up for 5 days on the bounce, telling us that they were taking the knee for racism, against racism, and to promote equality. And we had high-ranking ministers, including the Prime Minister in this country, say that it's okay for our population to boo them for taking the against racism and promoting equality. So when it starts at the top, what do you think is going to happen underneath in life? It promotes division. The taking of the knee over last month when the players tried to explain it was to promote equality and be against racism was ridiculed by our top-ranking government officials. So when we get racist abuse after a football match, at the end of a tournament, I expect it, unfortunately, because it exists and it's actually promoted by the Prime Minister, who called Muslim women letterboxes. I said they look like letterboxes. So honestly, we've got to do something about this. I keep saying it on television. I keep getting accused of having a go at the Conservative Party. It's nothing to do with Conservative or Labour or Liberal Democrat. It's to do with integrity. It's to do with doing the right thing. We've got to make sure that we promote inclusion, we promote equality, that we promote togetherness and have compassion generally in the way in which we live our lives. And we haven't seen that at times in the last 2 or 3 years. And like I say, the taking of the knee 2 or 3 weeks ago, I have to say it again, because I genuinely think at this moment in time we're numb with what is right and what is wrong. We don't know what's right and what's wrong anymore with misinformation, with the information that's coming at us daily. But we had a Prime Minister in this country say it was okay to boo people who were promoting equality and defending racism. Just say that to yourself in your own mirror a few times and ask yourself whether that's right. And we know it's wrong. So why do we tolerate these people?
Yeah, it can't be tolerated, Gary. Absolutely.
Please don't take that answer out of the rerun, will you? Thank you.
And that was so important, I think, that final sentence from Gary Neville. He knows how the corporate billionaire media work. So the bit that's likely to embarrass the establishment, embarrass power the most, is often the bit sometimes that the corporate media slides out of view. So it's left to the independent media, and he knows this as well. It's left to the independent media to keep it in, because they would never dream of taking it out, because it's probably one of the most important messages of the whole diatribe, of the whole narrative. And I think it was backed up beautifully by Billy Bragg. Just taking on board that, just do we need to worry about anything else? Let's look at the headline. Do we let the boorish minority win, or do we clear this shit out of society? Well, those on the left want to clear this shit out of society. Too many people on the right want to let the boorish minority win. And that's where we're at. And that's probably one of the major issues, Tom, that we have to overcome if we're going to be successful, if we're going to be able to, seriously challenge the inequalities, the injustices, the racisms, the homophobias, you name it. Only those on the left truly want to challenge it and overcome it. Whereas those on the right either don't care, or they might care a little bit, but they just certainly don't care enough to really stand up and do something about it. Yeah. And so that's how Boris Johnson gets into power. That's how Donald Trump gets into power. And that's why the establishment and the big corporate billionaires, they actually like the fact that these people are there, because they're taking away, as rightly, like you said, that if you want a power grab and you want a wealth grab, point over there, get people stirred up about something else, something puerile. And that's what we're doing. We're getting stirred up about something puerile, instead of all of us being out on the streets, all of us saying, no, we're not going to go to work today. All of us saying, stuff you, we've had enough.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's, I suppose we should wrap this discussion up, but I mean, I think what we're clearly saying is that, racism is being used by right-wing politicians to gain power, to stay in power, and to keep giving vast sums of money to their rich friends, who own most of the media, corporate media, and who use that media in a way to help get those people elected. So it's a sort of merry-go-round of corruption and lies. And unless people sort of wake up to that and don't fall for it, don't believe the stuff that's encouraged is deliberately put out there to encourage them to be racist and to place blame on people who should not be blamed, generally other poor people, whether they're black people, disabled people, people on benefits, unemployed people, even homeless people. They get the blame and at the same time, billionaires are having jollies off into space now. I mean, people need to wake up to what's really happening. Who's taking all the money?
And also, just to finish off on this topic, those same billionaires are guaranteeing that their children, their children's children, their children's children, and so on, never have to lift a finger to work again if they choose not to. Whereas the rest of us, the rest of the whole population of this planet, almost 7.5 billion, have to in order to survive, to get by from day to day. Within the game, the ideology, the model that's been constructed for us by them. People just need generally to wake up to that single fact that the game that they're living called life was designed by somebody else, and those people are either ripping them off or they generally don't give a stuff about them.
Yeah.
And